Okay. So prior to Christian usage, as I said, the Greeks had the idea that it was backward-looking, sunadesis. It just simply reflected upon, what have I done? And then it reflected upon, mostly, I have done wrong. Okay. And so really conscience only triggered, their description almost was as if it was an alarm bell going off, that to say, this is wrong, and it would start to ring. Or this is wrong, oh dear, I have that internal pain. And so this internal pain was their understanding. So Plutarch described it as an ulcer. However, with the New Testament, we now actually have an expanding idea of what conscience is. Okay? St. Paul is the first to use sunadesis in the New Testament. Now, he starts to spread its meaning, and so he's not simply looking at it as something that's backward-looking. He's actually also just looking at what's happening now and looking to the future. And so in terms of moral theology, we now have an understanding of conscience as being something that is looking in two directions. In other words, it's not simply a reflective instance, it's also something whereby we make a judgment about what we're about to do. And we heard the gospel passage that was being read out in exposition, which is tomorrow's the Sunday reading, describes what comes from within man, his intentions. Okay? So in other words, the list of intentions were all bad, actually. And so it linked a list of intentions with Jesus' declaration that makes us unclean. But in fact, we could then say in Psalm 50, we have that great prayer, a clean, a pure heart create for me, O God. Put a steadfast spirit within me. So it's the opposite, actually. And so there's within us the potential to have a bad intention. There's within us, actually, the potential to have a good intention, a desire to be close to God, a desire to be pure. And so, in fact, conscience sits in the middle of that, making the judgment to say, will I go for this or not? And conscience should say, if it's bad, don't touch it. Equally, if we have engaged with temptation, and Simon describing the little devil on your shoulder, if we have engaged with temptation, then conscience then afterwards says, we have done wrong. Okay, have mercy on me, God. Have mercy. So really conscience is at the heart of that. So St. Paul has a list of characteristics. And he says, first of all, it's a context of reflection about yourself. And also, for St. Paul, it starts to become a context of reflection about other people. So in other words, in your conscience, you can actually start to judge the situation around you to say, is this right or wrong? Am I doing right? Am I doing wrong? Is that person doing right or wrong? And also, he's then saying it's a human capacity related to God. Okay, and one of the things that we have at the back of the handout is a list of some scriptural quotes. There's a list of all of the New Testament quotes at the bottom of the page. Okay, but we won't go through all of them because it will take up most of the time. But at the back of it, you've got a list of short discussion points, and one of these here, as it says, Romans 9:1, my conscience in union with the Holy Spirit assures me of it too. And so this and a number of other ones, this is on page 5, St. Paul is connecting conscience with God. And really, in effect, at certain points, he's saying that there's a judgment of conscience, but it's always below the ultimate judgment of God. And so it means that God is our final judge. And so really St. Paul is saying, yes, my conscience is clear, but at the same time, God is my ultimate judge. Okay? So the two are connected, but at the same time, the ultimate judge is God himself. Okay. So it's clear that St. Paul develops the meaning of the term in such a way that his usage should not simply be equated with the former Greek notion, focused on bad past actions, but now really it should be expanded to an idea of positive things. And so on page 2 you hear how St. Paul also uses the idea of heart. Okay, and I've just quoted from Psalm 50, a pure heart create for me, O God. And so St. Paul is drawing from that Jewish tradition of the heart, and also in Job, when the Hebrew of Job was translated, in the Greek translation it's translated as conscience. It's quite interesting. So in Job 27. Okay, later on, after St. Paul, you get terms added to the word conscience that were never added before, because previously it was just bad reflective. Okay, so later New Testament writings now have things that we take for granted. Clear conscience, that's a new idea at that point. Clear conscience, pure conscience, guilty conscience, bad, all these different words, they're added to the idea, and so it expands at that point. The last part to do with New Testament is the connection between the church and oneself in relation to conscience. And so, in other words, we are to recognize our union as the body of Christ, and that's one thing we'll come back to at the end of the talk, that our own moral reflection is never isolated. Okay, so we're not on our own. And that's what we find as the last comment that we find in the New Testament. Okay. We jump through history to the Middle Ages. The Middle Ages summarized there on page 2. It says, conscience making judgments based on fundamental moral principles, and then conscience is fallible but with God-given dignity. Okay. The whole of the reflection of the period of the Middle Ages hinged on one text and then expanded away from that. Okay, and you've actually got that text on, let's see, page 5. It comes from St. Jerome, so patristic era. And St. Jerome is commenting on Ezekiel, just the beginning of the book, the prophet Ezekiel. And he's describing Ezekiel has a vision. And he has a vision of 4 animals. Okay, you know the story of this, where you have the man, lion, ox, and eagle. Okay, so now in the writing of St. Jerome, he's now making this into a moral description of the life of the Christian. Okay, and so he connects, as the Greeks had, he connects certain animals with certain human emotions. So, for example, you have an ox, you have a lion, you have what kind of emotions might you think? You have anger. Okay, certain emotions that are connected to this. So, rational, irascible, concupiscible elements, different things. Okay, so the desire, the anger, the reason that we have, all these different things are connected to these animals. But there's one that hovers like the eagle above. So what do you think is coming now? Yes, St. Jerome describes that hovering bird as conscience. Okay? Now, he uses the Greek word, which is synedesis. However, by the time it got to the Middle Ages, they were using a primitive form of cut and paste, which goes wrong nowadays on computers. So there's no surprise that in writing out by hand many times, particular texts from centuries ago, would you have any errors at all? No, it would be perfect every time, wouldn't it? No, just every so often you would end up with a mistake. Just a letter, maybe. And so, by the time it got to the 12th century, what they had was this huge, it's actually 6 volumes, okay? Huge book. Basically, they took the Bible and cut it into little small sections, okay? And so you have a page that big, and you have a little wee text there of the Bible, and all round it, you have a biblical commentary of different writers. So Jerome says this, Origen says, so you have all different commentary right round the text. Okay. So on this particular page of Ezekiel, it says, Jerome says this. Okay. And when it gets to the word sunedesis, somebody's written sunderesis. Okay. So they got the letters a bit jumbled up, and they ended up writing another Greek word. Okay, sunderesis. Now, did that change history? Well, in some ways, it helped history. It didn't change history. Actually, it helped the scholars of the time to summarize something that they already had in their theology. Okay, they were working on a description of what never leaves you in your heart. So you're back to your angel and your demon. Can it be the case that your desire for the good, seek good, avoid evil, that desire for God, all these basic desires, can they be completely rubbed away? What do you think? Well, there's a no. There's one no anyway. Is Michael, is that right? Yes, thank goodness I got a name right. Thank you. Thank you for that silent no. So yes. So you think no. Would anybody think yes? You think yes? Just to be awkward. Yes. Well, it's a question. You see, and that's what they debated. It was the question: could you go through life in such a way that really all of these things were switched off? A desire for the good. Could it go?
Probably hide it very well, but it would always be there whether you're conscious of it or not.
So that's really where they got to, was the idea that you might be able to hide it, you might really be able to mess it up and obscure it quite considerably, but deep down, it would still be there. And so what they came up with was an idea of conscience in 2 sections. Okay? And so they described the bit that can never be rubbed away as sunderesis. Okay? And the bit that can go wrong as conscientia. 2 parts to the whole thing of conscience. Okay? So the thing that can be never rubbed away is the thing that says, do good. Okay? And it's built into us. In other words, basically, that's our moral DNA. That's what God has given us. But then we have to think it out for practical things. So, because do good, avoid evil. Seek good, avoid evil. It's very broad, isn't it, really? I mean, if you got up in the morning and thought, what will I do today? I think I'll seek good, avoid evil. That's fine. So, and then go back to bed. You can't really work with that because it's too broad. It's too broad. And so what that's called is a fundamental first principle. It's a first principle. And so there's a short series of these fundamental first principles. Okay, some of them are actually not. It's hard to find them actually, because you can't put them into words. You know what they are, but you can't put them into words. Another one that's very famous nowadays is do unto others. Okay, so the idea of, I wouldn't like that to happen to me, so I won't do it to the other person. So that's a fundamental first principle.